Who is that Glory Kickboxing Giza fighting at Glory in Giza? LVD Sport takes a deep dive, so you don't have to. One of the few advantages of being a long-term tragic fan in both boxing and heavyweight kickboxing is that every now and then a crossover fight comes along that you can at least attempt to translate one world into the other, without sounding like you've just discovered this kickboxing through a highlight reel and a Reddit thread. Rico Verhoeven against Alexander Usyk is one of those moments. Most boxing fans will know the name in passing. Some will know he was the long-reigning Glory heavyweight champion. Others will have seen the physique, the height, the clean-cut image, and the broad promotional description. Dominant kickboxer, Dutch superstar, fighting royalty from a different code. All that is true enough, but it also doesn't tell you that much. Just who is the Glory kickboxing Giza fighting Usyk at Glory in Giza? I first noticed Rico Verhoeven back in 2008 when he was listed as a participant for the K1 World Grand Prix event in Hawaii. At the time, no opponent had even been announced, but what stood out was the raw profile. 19 years of age, 6 feet 5, already over 240 pounds, and entering the heavyweight kickboxing world with the sort of physical dimensions that immediately make you pay attention. He eventually fought a Japanese journeyman called Koichi Watanabe on that gloriously odd Hawaii show, buried on the untelevised portion of the card. My K1 fandom was deep enough at the time that I knew where to hunt these fights down, complete with Japanese commentary. I still own the burned DVD I made of the full event, which probably says more about me than it does about Rico. Given his size, youth, and the relatively safe matchmaking, I expected a showcase. What I got was something very different. Rico won, but he did so in a cautious, drama-free decision. He was defensively responsible, fundamentally sound, and risk-averse. Slightly underwhelming, yes, but also very revealing. In hindsight, that fight showed the bones of the fighter he would become. The body of a super heavyweight, the temperament of a percentage player, the instincts of someone more interested in control than carnage. That has been the Rico Verhoeven story ever since. Over the next 18 months or so, he won some, lost a handful, and did very little by way of violent statement making. Most of it went the distance. At one stage, I wondered if the prospect tag, which had moved from my own private interest into something more widely accepted, might already be wobbling. A points loss to Frenchman Brice Guidon didn't exactly age into a hidden gem of a defeat. But Rico did what serious fighters do. He kept going. He built himself through the much-missed It's Showtime circuit in Europe, the Simon Rutch-promoted scene that now feels part of a vanished kickboxing age. He was too well put together for hard, grim-faced battlers like Zevad Pucharak, Frank Munoz, and Ricardo van den Bosch, but he was badly outgunned by the Moroccan giant Jamal Ben Sadiq, who would later become his most notable rival. Rico was pulled out by his corner in the second round. Then came the real jolt. On the very final It's Showtime event in Amsterdam, Rico was wiped out inside a minute by Errol Zimmerman, the Bone Crusher, a fighter who could be frightening on the night and bewildering on the next one. Zimmerman was never the model of week-to-week reliability, which made the nature of the loss sting even more. Rico would meet him again later down the line, but that first defeat felt like a line in the sand. After 2 more decision fights, Rico signed with Glory, the organisation that would make him internationally known. Even there it didn't begin with fireworks. He lost his Glory debut in the quarter-final of their ambitious, yet financially reckless 16-man heavyweight tournament, beaten by the eventual winner Semi Schilt, the near 7-foot master of fighting to his own dimensions. There was no disgrace in that. Schilt was one of the most awkward and effective heavyweights the kickboxing sport has ever produced. Rico's real ascent came in October of 2013, where he won the Glory heavyweight title with decision wins over Gokhan Saki and Daniel Giza in a card televised live in the United States on Spike TV. It should have been a breakthrough for the promotion. Instead, like so many kickboxing swings in the American market, it landed with a distinct thud. The victories themselves were also slightly underwhelming. Efficient, intelligent, controlled, but not exactly the stuff of conquest. That became a theme. He followed the title with a messy non-title decision victory of the legendary Peter Aerts in Japan. Aerts was one of Rico's idols, but by that stage his balance and footwork had largely abandoned him, and the fight became an awkward footnote in both men's careers, rather than the passing of the torch moment it might have been in another timeline. In 2014, Rico rematched Daniel Giza in a heavily promoted pay-per-view grudge fight. There was plenty said and written beforehand, especially online, but once the bell rang, it became yet another cautious, low-temperature Rico Verhoeven decision win. The pattern was unmistakable by this point. Rico didn't care if you were bored, he only cared about winning. His only loss since 2012 came outside Glory, against Andrei Herasimchuk, a Belarusian octopus of a fighter who knocked Rico down, cut him, and had him looking distinctly uncomfortable in a points defeat that Glory had little incentive to acknowledge. It is one of those fights I would recommend watching before Saturday, not because it predicts the Usyk fight beat for beat, but because it shows Rico against someone awkward, mobile, difficult to time, and hard to impose upon. It is very telling. After that, Rico refocused. He beat Errol Zimmerman when Zimmerman's leg gave out, and then recorded 2 wins over Benjamin Adegbuyi, his friend and regular sparring partner. The rematch produced one of Rico's rare punch knockouts, and that matters. A rare punch knockout. For a man now about to contest the majority of the heavyweight boxing titles, it is worth underlining that Rico Verhoeven was never a thunderous punching destroyer, even in kickboxing. His best weapons were never really his hands. His game was balance, conditioning, low kicks, control, physical economy, and composure. Routine title defences over Mladen Brestovac and Braddock Silva followed before Rico finally became a much bigger name in the Netherlands through his fight with Badr Hari. Hari, for all his flaws and chaos, remains one of the most popular and magnetic fighters of the last 20 years across all fighting disciplines. The atmosphere around their first fight was absolutely febrile. The ending, caused by injury, was unsatisfying, but the event itself is definitely worth revisiting. Then came Rico's December 2017 win over Jamal Ben Sadiq, probably the most exciting and controversial victory of his Glory title reign. If you only watch one of a small handful of fights before the Giza event, his fights with Ben Sadiq should be those. It shows his toughness, his discomfort, his resolve, and also the sort of fighter who could drag him into life and death territory. And then, as so often, it was back to the familiar pattern: controlled decisions, familiar opponents, low drama. His 2018 rematch victory over Mladen Brestovac in Birmingham, England, was notable mainly for the sparse crowd and the growing disinterest as the fight drifted towards its conclusion. By this point, Rico's earning power, contractual status, and longevity as champion had begun to outstrip his commercial value at Glory. This created an awkward problem. He was the champion, the face of the promotion, the reliable winner, but not always the fighter who made people desperate to look at the next show. The rematch with Badr Hari in 2019 remains probably Glory's most famous night. This time, Rico's title was on the line, and the event was promoted brilliantly. Rico's flaws were visible. Hari hurt and floored him. The upset was there for the taking. The moment was there. And then, because this is Badr Hari, the whole thing folded in on itself. Hari injured himself attempting a kick, and Rico survived yet again. That fight is essential viewing if you want to understand Rico's career. He did not look unbeatable. He did not look spectacular, but he did not quit. He stayed in the fight long enough for the other man to unravel. Injuries and movies then kept him out from late 2019 until early 2021. Yes, that's movies. The Glory champion had become a broader Dutch celebrity by then, and his ring appearances became to feel less frequent and more complicated. When a planned fight with Ben Sadiq fell apart, Glory set up a 4-man heavyweight tournament as a make-good. Rico won this without much stress, but again drained much of the energy from the night with yet another safety-first performance. The Ben Sadiq fight was eventually rearranged, and another grueling struggle unfolded. Rico again came through, though Ben Sadiq's later PED issues have to colour how this rivalry is now viewed. It was both a serious effort from Rico and another reminder that a fairly basic but enormous and aggressive heavyweight had become a persistent thorn in his side. By then, Glory's own position was hardly straightforward. The chairman, Pierre Onderond, was funding events that often lost money. Rico was a 6-figure earner, and the champion's style was not always given the promotion the return it needed. Outside of the Hari and Ben Sadiq fights, many of his defences were too routine to generate real heat. Rico's appearances in the Glory ring began to dwindle. His celebrity in the Netherlands allowed him to stage his own event under the Hit It banner, where he beat another former opponent in Heshti Gergij. That too appears to have been a money-losing exercise, because we haven't exactly been drowning in follow-up events. A year later, he returned to Glory and took another comfortable 5-round decision, this time over the raw but strong Kevin Tariq Asaro. If you watched it, you probably recall the result more easily than the actual action. Glory then staged yet another heavyweight tournament, partly because the roster had become thin enough to make it feasible financially. Despite hopes for an upset, Rico came through again. Levi Richters dropped him early in the final, but Rico recovered, reasserted control, and did what Rico does. The knockdown was enough of a storyline to justify a rematch, which Rico won too without much complaint or incident yet again. This brings us up to June of last year, and his final appearance as Glory heavyweight champion at Glory 100. The challenger was Artem Vakitov, a former light heavyweight great, brought back into the fold in the hope that his skill might trouble the champion and generate a little traction for the embattled promotion. Vakitov had moments of craft, but like everyone else, he ran out of time before he could truly solve the Verhoeven puzzle. With nobody obvious left to conquer, and with Glory seemingly frustrated by the cost-of-value balance of his reign, Rico vacated the heavyweight title roughly 50 days short of Joe Louis's historic heavyweight title reign mark. The only heavyweight champion in Glory history up to that point was moving on. Which brings us to Alexander Usyk. There is one story from Rico's past that feels particularly relevant. In 2014, he was among several well-known heavyweight kickboxers, including the aforementioned Hesdy Gergish, Daniel Giza, and Benjamin Adekbouy, invited into a Tyson Fury training camp as sparring partners. The logic was obvious. Big, tough, rugged fighters from a brutal striking sport that could be useful to Fury, swelling a little bit costly effective. Within 3 days, both had been sent home. The issue by all accounts was suitability, ego, and the simple discomfort of being handled by a boxer operating on a different plane. Rico was the exception who stayed longer, but even he has admitted that Fury was far better and more versatile than he'd expected. He found the experience painful, galling, and humbling, to the point that he wondered whether he should leave along with the others. That was 12 years ago, and Rico has learned plenty since, as well as making a strong bond with the Fury camp. But it is worth keeping in mind when assessing the scale of this Saturday's task. Because the heart of this fight is not whether Rico Verhoeven was a great kickboxer, he was. The question is whether parts of that greatness survived translation into the sport of boxing. His strengths in kickboxing were conditioning, footwork for a super heavyweight, composure, versatility, physical economy, and the ability to win uneventfully. Those are valuable qualities. The problem is that they are also hallmarks of Alexander Usyk, except Usyk expresses them in the actual sport taking place on Saturday night. Rico's strongest weapon is his low kick. In boxing, that weapon is not just neutralised, it is illegal. His best route to discouraging big men in kickboxing simply does not exist here. The areas where Rico does not particularly stand out are the areas where most likely need to cause the upset: punching power, pure boxing ability, unpredictability, and sustained aggression. He is not a wild-card puncher. He is not a naturally explosive hand fighter. He is not a reckless marauder who can get the contest into a mess before Usyk gets into his rhythm. He is at heart a disciplined, careful, well-conditioned operator from another sport stepping into a boxing ring with one of the finest boxers of his generation. There is also the matter of distance. Rico has never had to fight longer than 25 minutes in his lengthy career. A 12-round heavyweight boxing match is a different physical and psychological demand, especially against a southpaw technician who makes opponents think, reset, miss, chase, and wilt. So unless the champion has been offered some sort of sweetener to make this less of a formality than it appears, the most likely outcome is not drama, it is procession. Usyk may not even need to be at his sharpest, he simply needs to be himself. Movement, angles, feints, educated pressure, bodywork, volume, and the steady accumulation of moments Rico cannot answer quickly enough. I expect Verhoeven to be brave, I expect him to be fit, I expect him to stay organised for as long as possible. But bravery and conditioning are not enough when the tools do not translate, and when the man across from you is built to punish precisely that half step of hesitation. My expectation is that Usyk takes control early, starts finding him cleanly, and by the middle rounds Rico is exhausted, bruised, and being walked through a boxing education he cannot quite escape. Whether the stoppage comes from Usyk, the referee, the corner, or Peter Fury deciding enough is enough, I would be surprised if it goes beyond the 7th round. And when it is over, I suspect the feeling will be familiar. Not shock, not revolution, not a great crossover moment for the ages. Just more likely, is that it? That'll do for this time. If you've enjoyed us, please let us know in the comments or give me a like. Thank you very much if you've listened this far. Until next time, keep your gloves up and your chin down.